watching World News Program. I'm your host Miriam Zian, and these are the headlines. After hours of indirect talks in Muscat, Tehran describes the negotiation atmosphere as positive and confirms an agreement to continue discussions. Oman says the mediation talks were very serious, while the White House stresses that President Trump prioritizes diplomacy while maintaining military readiness. As residential areas are destroyed, 2 Palestinians are killed by Israeli fire in northern Gaza. The United Nations reports that the returnees at the Rafah crossing faced humiliation, while the International Organization for Migration urges safe passage for civilians without forced displacement. In Morocco, lawyers hold large-scale protests in Rabat against a draft law on the legal profession, announcing restrictive policies and imposed decisions. Civil society groups accuse the authorities of targeting whistleblowers, curbing their freedoms. Russian strike kills 2 in Zaporizhzhia. Kremlin calls Kiev talks extremely difficult and blames Ukraine for Deputy Defense Minister assassination attempt. Hello and welcome back to the details. First, Iran and the US resume talks in Muscat, Oman, with Tehran calling the discussions positive and Oman describing them as serious, while Washington stressing diplomacy but keeping military options open. Nabil Khazini has more details.
On the surface, the script was simple. Washington says it is ready to talk. Tehran said it is ready to talk too. But beneath that calm language lies a deeper truth. Because even before the talks began, the fault lines were already visible, and they have not moved. For the United States, diplomacy must produce more than conversation. Officials say communication is improving, but the real challenge is the gap between what each side expects to gain. Iran, however, is refusing to widen the agenda. Tehran insists the negotiations remain strictly about the nuclear file and nothing else.
I think our negotiation with the U.S. delegation was, in fact, done in a good atmosphere. We were able to exchange our viewpoints, to express our concerns and our interests for a possible deal between the 2 sides on our nuclear question.
Different priorities, one table, and almost no room for compromise. Still, neither side is walking away. Iranian officials left Moscow calling the talks constructive. They say the sessions helped clarify positions and created a path for future discussions. But they also made one thing clear. No agreement was reached, and both sides must return home to consult. From Washington, the tone was careful. U.S. officials acknowledged progress in communication, but stressed the deep gaps remain, especially over the future shape of any deal. Behind the scenes, Oman's role was essential. The talks were indirect, with each side kept apart, and Omani mediators shuttling messages between them, a reminder of just how fragile this process is. So the talks in Moscow remain a test. At best, it becomes the first step toward easing a region already on edge. At worst, it confirms what many fear, that the divide between Washington and Tehran is too deep to bridge, even with diplomacy at the table.
The Omani Foreign Minister Badr Busaidi described the mediation talks held in Muscat between Iran and the United States as very serious. In a tweet on X on Friday, he said the talks were useful in clarifying Iranian and American positions and in identifying potential areas of progress in the negotiation process. Friday, Iran called for what it described as mutual respect ahead of talks with envoys of U.S. President Donald Trump in the Sultanate of Oman. In a post on X on Friday, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stressed that mutual respect and shared interests are essential pillars for a lasting agreement, affirming that Iran is entering a new phase of diplomacy with open eyes and a memory of last year's events. He added that Iran is engaging in good faith while standing firmly by what it calls its rights in the talks with the United States regarding Iran's nuclear program in the Omani capital, Muscat.
Iran enters diplomacy with its eyes open and firm memories of last year. We engage in good faith and hold fast to our rights. Commitments must be honored. Equality in status, mutual respect, and shared interests are not just words. They are necessities and pillars of a lasting agreement.
On Friday, China urged the United States and Iran to resolve differences through dialogue, saying it maintains communication with all parties. Li Qian, the spokesman of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, made the remarks at a regular briefing in response to a media query about U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations.
China has maintained communication with all parties on relevant issues and hopes that all parties will resolve differences through dialogue to jointly safeguard regional peace and stability.
And the Kremlin expressed hope that the ongoing negotiations between Iran and the United States in Muscat will produce positive results leading to de-escalation, calling on all parties to exercise restraint. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Moscow urges all concerned countries to remain calm regarding the situation involving Iran and related regional tensions. And the U.S. State Department announced sanctions on 15 entities and 14 vessels from Iran's so-called shadow fleet over alleged illegal trade in Iranian oil, petroleum products, and petrochemicals. State Department spokesperson Tommy Pigott said on Friday that President Donald Trump remains committed to reducing Iran's oil and petrochemical exports as part of what he described as the administration's maximum pressure campaign on Tehran. Moving on now to occupied Palestine, 2 were killed by Israeli occupation fire in northern Gaza on Friday morning, while the body of another victim was recovered in the north of the Strip as the Israeli forces launched airstrikes and demolished buildings in both southern and northern Gaza. Media outlets citing an emergency medical source reported that 2 Palestinians were shot dead outside Israeli deployment zones in Jabali al-Balad and Beit Lahia, adding that the body of another victim was retrieved outside the Yellow Line in Al-Waha area of Gaza City. This comes as Israeli forces continue demolishing buildings across the Strip and open fire from military vehicles and helicopters on the city of Rafah. And the UN Office for Human Rights in occupied Palestinian territory said Palestinians returning to Gaza through the Rafah crossing reported a repeated pattern of mistreatment, abuse, and humiliation by Israeli forces for the 3rd consecutive day. In a statement issued Thursday evening, the office said returnees reported being subjected to violence, degrading interrogations, and invasive body searches, noting that they were handcuffed and blindfolded.
Upon reaching the Israeli checkpoint, returnees reported violence, degrading interrogations, and invasive searches that violated their privacy, sometimes while they were bound and blindfolded. They also said soldiers denied access to medical care and toilets, causing severe humiliation, including forcing some to urinate in public. Together, these accounts indicate a pattern of conduct that violates Palestinians' rights to personal security and dignity, and their right to be free from torture and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment.
The International Organization for Migration stressed that civilian movement through the Rafah crossing must be safe and dignified without attempts at forced displacement, allowing people to return whenever they choose. In a statement released Friday, the IOM urged all concerned parties to respect the agreement and ensure Rafah becomes a genuine humanitarian corridor, facilitating aid flow and easing restrictions, warning that Gaza's critical humanitarian situation can no longer endure additional obstacles. The crimes of the Zionist occupation against the people of the Gaza Strip continue as it withholds the bodies of hundreds of martyrs, then returns them mutilated and dismembered, making identification difficult due to torture and decomposition. This exacerbates the suffering of the families of the missing as they try to identify their loved ones. Usama Ayadi has the report.
Here in Gaza, the processions of martyrs never cease, but this one is different. It includes bodies whose features have been erased, whose names have been stolen, and who have returned to be buried in the soil of their homeland as temporary numbers, awaiting the day their identities will be revealed. Between the lack of resources and the harshness of the siege, these martyrs are laid to rest in mass graves, their headstones bearing temporary numbers. Their names may be missing from the records, and the shattered laboratories may be unable to decipher their identities, but the soil of Gaza, which embraced their blood, knows them well.
I lost my brother while he was still a minor. He had fled to southern Gaza during the war due to the difficult conditions in northern Gaza at the time. When he passed through the Humanitarian area, all traces of him disappeared, and we have had no news since. We appealed to the Red Cross and humanitarian organizations, but no one responded. Today, we are raising our voices to the world. We just want to know where our children disappeared.
Today we're confronted with horrific images of bodies that have arrived mutilated and with limbs severed in a way that raises suspicion. But the most harrowing side was that of the bodies whose abdomens have been cut open and then crudely stitched back together, raising widespread medical and legal concerns that these martyrs have been subjected to systematic organ harvesting before being handed over.
Corpses should not be delivered in such a brutal manner. Science has advanced and there are many alternative methods that allow families to identify the bodies of their missing relatives, such as DNA testing or other humane approaches. This method is unacceptable. Families arrive in a fragile psychological state. How can you see your brother's decomposed body with no information and possibly not be able to recognize it? Most will be shocked, and as a result, they may not be able to identify the body.
Today they are buried under one name, the martyrs of Gaza. They departed nameless in the archives of the world, but known in the memory of the land that embraced them. These graves will remain a testament to one of the most brutal chapters of human suffering in modern times. In Gaza, death may steal your name, but it cannot steal the honor of belonging to this land.
The organizing committee of the global Al Samoud Freedom Flotilla to break the siege on Gaza announced that its ships will sail toward Gaza on March 8th or 9th. Speaking at a press conference in Johannesburg, South Africa, the committee said the flotilla will depart from Barcelona and other Mediterranean ports with plans to organize 2 land convoys from North Africa and Asia. It said the convoy will carry medical and food aid, adding that more than 1,000 doctors, environmental and health experts, and war crimes investigators will take part in the mission. The United Nations said that Israeli settlers' attacks and harassment in the occupied West Bank forced the displacement of around 700 Palestinians in January, the highest monthly total since the start of the Gaza war more than 2 years ago. Citing data from OCHA, the UN reported that at least 694 Palestinians were forcibly displaced, noting that settler violence has become a major driver of forced displacement in the West Bank. A delegation from the Syrian Ministry of Defense held a meeting with representatives of the Syrian Democratic Forces and Hasaka to discuss integrating personnel into the national military and implementing the remaining provisions of the agreement. Syrian media said the delegation led by Hamza al-Hamidi, head of the operations in the Syrian Arab Army, emphasized respect in the agreement, including phased military and administrative integration, deployment of security forces in Hasaka and Qamishli, and the handover of state institutions, crossings, and border points. Lebanon signed an agreement on Friday to transfer convicted prisoners to their home country, opening the way for hundreds of Syrian inmates to return to Syria. The deal signed in Beirut with Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam and Syrian Justice Minister Mazhar al-Weiss will be followed by another on Syrian detainees. Officials described the move as a chance to reset bilateral relations, while Syria vowed to address the fate of long-imprisoned missing persons. And in other news, Moroccan lawyers held mass protests outside the parliament in Rabat on Friday, denouncing provisions in the draft law on the legal profession that they say threaten its independence and fundamental principles. Thousands of lawyers from various Moroccan professional unions carried signs and chanted slogans demanding judicial independence, along with freedom, dignity, and social justice.
We, women and men lawyers in Morocco, stand at a pivotal moment in our profession's history. With clarity and responsibility, we affirm that what is being imposed in the name of reform is no genuine reform, but a legislative path that threatens the essence of the legal profession and its constitutional role in the justice system. This is neither a technical dispute nor a irremediable misunderstanding, but a political choice to reshape the defense profession outside the principles of independence, the spirit of the Constitution, and the consensus on which a state of justice and the rule of law is founded.
The Association of Moroccan Bar Associations has held the Hanouch government responsible for the worsening conditions in the legal profession, voicing strong concern over what it called a unilateral legislative approach to an issue directly affecting the independence of legal defense. In the statement on Friday, the association's president, Dean Hussein Zayani, reaffirmed lawyers' rejection of the draft law in its current form, citing its lack of consensus, weak reform foundations, and threat to the core roles and independent identity of the profession.
The Executive Bureau of the Association of Bar Association in Morocco holds the government fully responsible, constitutionally and politically, for the current situation and calls on it to adopt a balanced approach that preserves rights and align with the Constitution and international standards. The association emphasizes that the national protest sends a clear message. The legal profession is united in demanding a return to a serious, responsible, and participatory approach with credible political guarantees, avoiding exclusionary measures or imposed decisions, which would undermine trust in reform and the stability of the justice system.
Moroccan human rights organization has accused the Hanouch government of targeting human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society activists for their oversight of public affairs. In a statement on Thursday, the group Justice for the Right to a Fair Trial called for stronger protection for human rights defenders, warning of a dangerous erosion of participatory democratic standards amid a growing climate of intimidation and harassment.
Instead of encouraging corruption reporting, those who do so are being criminalized. This marks a serious regression from constitutional and international commitment to undermine participatory democracy in Morocco. Such prosecutions violate rights guaranteed under Article 19, 21, and 22 of the International Covenant, including freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and association. Punishing defenders for reporting corruption sends a clear message of intimidation to other civil society actors.
Algerian Minister of State for Energy and Mines Mohamed Arqab announced that actual production at the Kafra oil field in Niger will begin in March. Speaking on the sidelines of the North Africa Regional Seminar in Algeria, Arqab said the Sonatrach-led project is in its final phase before entering full production next month.
سوناتراك تشتغل هناك وهي حققت نتائج كبيرة في هذا الحقل.
Sonatrach is working there and has achieved significant results in this very important field. The visit I paid to Niger also falls within this framework, which is to launch the second phase of this project and the beginning of production in the Kafra field. Starting from next March, there will be significant activities in this field by Sonatrach company and its subsidiary Inafor in this region, and the actual start of production of the Kafra project.
Minister Mohamed Arqab also announced the launch of a new international licensing round in the second half of 2026, covering 24 exploration blocks across the country. He said the tender aims to boost national production, especially natural gas, to meet growing domestic demand and expand exports.
مناقصة ثانية راح تشاركونا معها في السداسي الثاني يعني في
A second tender will be issued in the second quarter, starting next June. We will launch a second tender for 24 hydrocarbon exploitation areas, particularly natural gas. The goal behind this is to develop hydrocarbons in Algeria and our natural gas production, to be among the leaders in this field with complete control over production methods, marketing, and access to large markets.
Thousands of Libyans attended the funeral of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, son of former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, in Beni Walid, northwestern Libya. His body was buried after Friday prayers attended by tribal leaders, social figures, and supporters. Saif al-Islam was assassinated on Tuesday by unknown assailants, according to reports. The United Nations called for urgent action to protect local communities in Nigeria and bring perpetrators to justice. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, through his spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric, strongly condemned what he described as a terrorist attack in Kwara State on February 3rd, which killed more than 100 people, reaffirming the UN's solidarity with Nigeria in fighting terrorism and violent extremism.
The Secretary-General strongly condemns the terrorist attack of February 3rd in Kwara State in Nigeria, which reportedly killed over 100 people. The Secretary-General conveys his heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims and to the people and government of Nigeria, and he, of course, wishes a speedy recovery to all those injured. The Secretary-General reiterates the solidarity of the United Nations with the government and people of Nigeria in their efforts to fight terrorism and violent extremism. He stresses the importance of bringing the perpetrators to justice.
The head of the Zaporizhzhia Regional Military Administration, Ivan Fedorov, announced on Friday that 2 people were killed in a Russian drone airstrike overnight, which hit a house in the city of Vilnyansk in southern Ukraine. Fedorov said on Telegram that the victims, a married couple in their 40s, died after the drone struck their home directly. In an earlier post, he reported that a 14-year-old boy was injured in a separate strike targeting the center of Zaporizhzhia region. Meanwhile, Regional Governor Ole Sinyobov said another attack hit the outskirts of Kharkiv, with no immediate reports of casualties. The Kremlin described this week's US-mediated talks with Ukraine aimed at ending the war as very difficult but constructive, confirming that negotiations will continue. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters on Friday that the 2 days of talks were challenging but productive, adding that dialogue will proceed in the next phase. The second round of negotiations ended on Thursday without announcing tangible progress on major issues, though both sides exchanged dozens of prisoners of war the same day. Russia's investigative committee said on Friday that Deputy Defense Minister General Vladimir Alexeyev was the target of an assassination attempt in Moscow after an unknown assailant opened fire. A spokesperson said the suspect fired multiple shots at the general, a senior official in the Russian general staff, inside a residential building on Volokolamsk highway in Moscow. The attacker fled the scene. The general was hospitalized for treatment. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov blamed Ukraine for the attempted assassination of the Deputy Defense Minister. Speaking to Russian television on Friday, Lavrov said the terrorist attack reflects what he called the Zelensky government's strategy of ongoing provocations aimed at undermining peace negotiations to end the war in Ukraine.
This terrorist act once again confirmed the Zelensky regime's focus on constant provocations aimed in return at disrupting the negotiation process, and also the regime's commitment to do anything to convince its Western sponsors to keep pressuring the United States in its efforts to derail them from achieving a fair settlement.
US President Donald Trump has called for negotiating a new updated treaty immediately after the expiration of the New START, the last remaining nuclear arms control agreement between Moscow and Washington. Trump said on his platform Truth Social on Thursday evening that instead of extending the existing treaty, nuclear experts should work on an improved, modernized agreement that could last into the future.
The president's been pretty clear that he wants a better agreement. As we all know, New START expired yesterday. The president clarified again last night that he wants a new treaty. And look, in a nutshell, New START was flawed. It didn't cover theater range nuclear weapons, and it didn't include China. Look forward to being here today. Thank you all very much.
The United States called on Friday for trilateral nuclear talks with Russia and China to establish new limits on nuclear weapons following the expiration of the last treaty between Washington and Moscow. Speaking at a conference on disarmament in Geneva, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Arms Control Thomas DiNanno said what he described as Russian violations, growing global stockpiles, and loopholes in the design and implementation of the New START require a new framework suited to today's challenges. And that's a wrap for tonight's program. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye for now.